Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It is the daily, it is Monday, and it is such a sad day. Spring ball is over. The summer
and spring is
off-season
over. Look
here.
outside. Spring's over. Like
Well,
the weather.
I think spring is going to be back a lot sooner than football.
Fair.
Maybe.
Let's hope. I'm optimistic for that. But I know that Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham, and me, Austin Ward, are going to have to go for the rest of April, all of May, all of June, all of July with no football practices again. And the most thing that we have to look forward to is going to Indianapolis and listening to coaches talk, at least when it comes to this current version of the Buckeyes. I know there's probably other opportunities we're going to have, but the summer offseason is the worst. Am I right?
It is long and it is strong, and it's bound to get the friction on. And the friction that it causes is between us and our content availability.
That's right. That's well said.
Thank you.
I was really wondering where you were going with that.
I didn't think it was going to be good.
So was I.
Didn't think it was going to make sense, but you got there. You nailed it.
Thank you.
Bill decided that we should do a stonk watch on a Monday.
A final spring stonk watch.
Are we doing it just for the spring game itself or for all of camp, Bill?
I think we do it for all of camp. And I also think that it doesn't necessarily have to be, and I guess we've done this in the past, like it doesn't have to be on individual players too. I think it can be on like ideas or thought processes heading into the off season.
Ideas about ideas.
Certainly. I saw I think it was Texas A&M like picked up a fullback out of the transfer portal, and I was like, oh, I wonder if that was the idea about the idea, because like it never occurred to me that Ohio State might look at the transfer portal for a fullback. I don't think they are, but I was like, oh yeah, you can do that if you want to.
If they don't have an option to play fullback on this roster, I don't know what they've been doing. It can't be that difficult. I mean, I know replacing Mitch Rossi is going to be hard, but it's not that hard.
No, certainly not. You would think not, anyway.
They should put Tyleik Williams at fullback.
Hell yeah. I'm in.
Old school.
That would be old school. Except that I think they kind of need him on the defensive line. I could be wrong. I don't think I am.
It's a good way to keep them engaged, though. You know, you're like, look, Tyleik, if you want to play defense, then you need to play offense too.
You know? I don't know if that'll work, but it's
the old carrot. It's the old carrot versus the stick approach. You know.
Yeah, we're off to a great start. Let's dive into stonks instead. Berm, you go first.
I talked about him pregame on Saturday, and then he really played well in the spring game, and he had a really good spring, and that's Gabe Powers. I thought that he is a player who, as he was coming out of high school at Marysville, I wasn't sure if he was a guy who was going to grow into a defensive end. I wasn't sure if he had the athleticism to play linebacker in the system at Ohio State. But he really acquitted himself quite nicely this spring as we got a chance to really see him do stuff, because we didn't see that a year ago. He didn't enroll early, and then we didn't see him practice at all because we didn't get to watch any real practices last year. So, and as I mentioned Saturday, he didn't play a single snap as a true freshman. So for him to take that step that he's taken, I think that he's proven he can play at Ohio State. And I think the most important thing is that he proved that to himself. And now you can really start to see how Ohio State can utilize him in the future. Big body, quick, read things really well in the passing game, which is important because his frame and his role would probably have him covering tight ends a lot of the times. And I just thought he really had a good spring. So I'm definitely stonk up on Gabe Powers.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I came out of the game specifically feeling like really good about their linebacker depth. Obviously, Tommy and Steele didn't play, and you know how good those guys are, but I thought Gabe played well. I thought CJ played well. Cody Simon was solid last year. That seems like it's continuing. And Reed Carrico, I thought, played well too. He had one or two maybe miscues, but he had some pretty good plays there too to kind of
flashed. He was in the backfield a lot, I mean, he got there. Now you have to tackle the guys. Obviously, that's the problem. But as we talked about on Saturday, the Ohio State running backs are not exactly easy to tackle, but Reed put himself in a position to make plays. And I think that's all you really want to see, is that he knows where he's going to be and he sees and reads things well. Reads.
He does read. Oh, I wonder if that's why they named him that. No, probably not.
It was incredible foresight.
It was. They should have named him fullback Carrico.
That would have been a little too on the nose.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I think in Ironton it can fly. Feels like something that people of Ironton would appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah, rugged dude.
I'm fullback Carrico. I play linebacker for the Tanks.
See,
gonna play fullback for the Buckeyes when I'm done here.
Yeah,
I like it. I think that'd be great.
All right, is it my turn?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I will. We buy a lot of stock when we do these episodes. I'm gonna sell some. I would like to get rid of some. I don't think it holds much value anymore, and it is the idea that like Ohio State needs to address interior defensive line depth with someone who is not currently on the roster. I know like the Tank Booker thing sort of came and went. He's going to Arkansas, right? Is that where he committed to, Berm?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It like Hero Canoe played well on Saturday, and it's not like Hero Canoe had one good practice, like everything's set there. But I think you have to understand like what they need Hero Canoe to be, and like they don't need him to play on every down. They need him to be good enough that he can spell the top three guys, and you don't have such a drastic drop off that the team's just going to run the ball down your throat when he's on the field. And I think like he showed me enough in the game on Saturday to at least leave me kind of intrigued about what he could become over the next few months. Like I saw Jason Moore at the game, and I was like, oh yeah, that guy's coming here. Like you forget about him. And we saw Caden McDonald earlier in the spring was kind of hanging around the program. Like they have guys coming. And I just don't feel like the sense of urgency that I felt prior to the start of spring about them having to bring a guy in specifically at the defensive tackle position. I know Ryan Day talked a little bit about the depth after the game, and even he like didn't seem overly alarmed by it. It just sort of seemed like normal, like we need to be better in the depth, and I think we will be kind of talk. It wasn't like we need to bring somebody in immediately. So I think they're okay there. It's maybe a little thinner than you'd like it to be in an ideal situation, but I think they can get by with what they have. I don't know if you guys feel that way, but I kind of came out of spring feeling that way.
Didn't we also see on the third open practice, Jaden McKenzie running with the ones for a little bit? Like that.
Yeah, he gets overlooked a lot. I mean, he made a couple plays in the spring game, and another guy, he's been there like 5 years, I think. So at some point you expect that he's going to contribute.
I think that's to Bill's point. Like if when we started talking about that a lot after, let's say, the first third of spring camp, like it didn't really look that good. You wondered, all right, beyond the top three, who's going to do it? And that's we also said at the same time, it's early. A lot can change. They're going to have a lot of practices, and it really came up more specifically with Hero Canoe. That was like, why aren't we? People would ask, why aren't you talking about him? Like, well, he hadn't done a lot, and he still had 10 more practices to go. And guess what? It seemed like he got better. The more football you play, the better that you're going to do it, just like anything else in life. So he's gone through it. He's not played a ton of football in his life. So that learning curve for him could be pretty dramatic once it starts to click for him. He's going to get more workouts ahead of him. Whatever Mickey Marotti thinks that Hero Canoe needs to do with his body to be an impactful player this spring, like he's going to have, several months now to do that. And he's got these 15 practices under his belt. And I thought that the last one there on Saturday was pretty good for him. And so if you're adding that into the mix and you get consistent work, engaged work from Tyleik Williams, that's obviously a positive. You know that, or we assume that Mike Hall is going to play a lot more snaps this fall than he did last fall, even though he didn't have to do that on Saturday in the spring game. And they trust Ty Hamilton a lot. So just from that group, that could be enough, right? I think you're probably right about that, Bill.
I think you're right about it for this year, but you guys know I tend to look at things with an eye toward the future. And when you look at Jaden McKenzie, Mike Hall, Ty Hamilton, and Tyleik Williams, all four of those guys could be gone after this coming season. It's not likely that like all of them will leave, but they all could go.
I would like to bet right now that Mike Hall is leaving. Just want to
get I would think. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to begin looking at it.
Buying stock in that.
Yeah. I think you have to. And so if you can find a young defensive tackle that can build into the program, it's not the same as finding a plug and play, fifth year guy to help just with depth for this year. It's about the coming future, because you really can only look at it and say, well, okay, if all those guys leave, which is a real possibility, then you have Hero Canoe and Jason Moore and Caden McDonald, and that's it. So that's an issue.
That's a good point. Yeah. I will add the caveat to what I said. I'm only talking about next season.
It's a very specific stock.
That's right.
It expires on January 13th of 2024.
Look at that. He's predicting
Right?
a national championship berth.
I'm just saying, you build in contracts. That's how they work. Duh. I'm a business expert on contract law.
And stock law. Stock contracts, of course. Everyone has those stock contracts. Yeah, everyone.
Don't think
known
about
for
it
their
too
stock
hard.
contracts.
If anybody thinks too hard about our content, it all blows up, Berm. Don't.
Yeah, I bought Apple stock 13 years ago, and then it expired, unfortunately. So I was just left without it, which was terrible.
Anyway, yeah, it's a real thing. Just don't worry about it. Okay, you'll learn about it someday, just like you learned about gambling.
Don't look it up.
No, please don't do that. Maybe it's too obvious, but I'll do it anyway. I think that the stock, I already had a good amount in Kyle McCord, not just to be the starting quarterback for Ohio State, but to be a very good one. And I think that the spring for him went better than I would have imagined that it could. And not just that I think he's going to be the starter, that he had the lead, that he knows the offense better. There was the notion going in from, many people. We've talked about this, like Devin Brown's athleticism, and this belief maybe that Kyle McCord couldn't do that because of the comparison head-to-head between the two. I thought he showed a lot of things with his legs as a runner, as a passer, extending plays outside the pocket, making throws on the move that we saw. I thought those were two things that he needed to show and did. We mentioned the leadership going in the pregame on Saturday, and we saw him at the front of the line. Again, we're reading tea leaves and small details, but being the first one out of the tunnel and making sure that guys get in line and follow him out does count. That's not the rest of the team isn't going to look to guys that they don't respect as a leader. So the fact that they were doing that tells you that there are a lot of people on board with, Kyle McCord being the face for the Buckeyes, being the engine of the offense and one of the faces of the program. So that's 15 practices that are good for him. It's not, again, this is isolated for him. It doesn't mean that Devin Brown can't come back, have a really good training camp. The competition heats up again in August. That can happen. But I think that Kyle McCord had a really good spring, and that's worth mentioning because it's pretty significant who's leading Ohio State at quarterback as they're trying to win a national championship and get back on top of the Big Ten and then win the rivalry game in the Big House in November.
Did you guys think that Kyle looked a lot skinnier on Saturday than he did when spring practice started? Or was I just having a weird moment?
He walked out of the tunnel and I thought he looks smaller, but like I don't want to say it out loud because I don't make a thing of it, but I did kind of think that. Yeah.
I just thought he looked like he's lost a few pounds since the start of spring camp, which I guess is a natural thing to happen when you're doing all the work that they're doing. But when he was standing directly next to Devin Brown at the podium on Saturday afternoon, I was taken aback by that. I thought Devin looked noticeably bigger than Kyle, which is not what I thought heading into the spring. Maybe I was just at a weird angle. I don't know.
I think he had some of what we noticed with Jack Sawyer and Caden Curry at the start of camp, where they had to put on a ton of weight, and then it was all sort of carried right here. And then Kyle McCord's features were sharper on Saturday. That's the kind of analysis you can only get here on the podcast. By the way,
I just thought it was just a weird thought. I don't know. You know how my brain works. I was thinking about it, and I was looking at a picture of him when he was walking into the stadium that I took. And I'm like, man, he looks like he's skinnier than he did 6 weeks ago. And I wondered if that was on purpose to try to make sure that he was able to be a little bit more nimble.
Well, I don't know that I thought on Saturday that he looked skinnier. I think that maybe the weight had settled a little bit better on him, or he was carrying it better. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. I just same way that
it's really irrelevant, but I just
it sure is.
Like Jack and Caden didn't lose weight; they're just like more carved up slabs of beef now.
Fair. I agree. I mean, sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
No, I want to. You might have been going there already. I would like to take the temperature of the room about where we all are in the quarterback competition compared to where we thought we might be at the start of spring once we got to this point.
I'm about where I thought I would be. I believe that the job, despite the fact that Ryan Day will not say it out loud, and shouldn't say it out loud. I believe the job is Kyle's to lose. I would have liked to see both of the guys get a chance to play on Saturday in the spring game and run the offense and see how things look. And I think that you're probably right of what you said on snap judgments on Saturday, that at that point, like, Devin's not out there. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State said, you know what, let's not even do a lot of weird stuff today with quarterbacks, and let's just reassess and get into, summertime. I think the job is still Kyle's to lose. I think he's probably put a little distance between him and Devin. And that's pretty much where I thought it should be and would be.
I definitely want to hear Bill's answer, because I think out of the three of us, he's maybe he'll prove me wrong. I think he still believes it's closer than I do, for sure. Maybe, and Berm suggested some distance there that maybe he hasn't felt, or at least at the midway point. I thought early on that this is where it was heading, and Kyle was playing so well that the word I used throughout was inevitable. I don't know when Ryan Day is going to name Kyle McCord officially the starter, and to Berm's point, it doesn't really matter. Like, they can compete in August just the same way that Justin Fields had to, or CJ Stroud after that, or anybody else that they've worked with. Like, they've kept that going. That's fine. I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. Competition is good for Ohio State, and there's no point in finalizing a depth chart in April if you don't have to, which they don't. But I do think that whenever that day comes, that Kyle McCord has shown that he is more ready to lead Ohio State at this moment.
I think if you'd ask me right now who I think is going to be the starter, I would pick Kyle McCord. I probably do think it's a little closer than you guys seem to think, but there's a gap there. Like, it's a consistency thing, and we've gotten to watch a good amount of practice, and I feel like almost every time Kyle's been more consistent. Probably every time Kyle's been more consistent. I don't think this is ultimately all that important, but it did feel like there was an opportunity for Kyle to kind of really slam that door shut on Saturday, and I don't think that he did. I don't think it's a major issue that he did not, but it's something. Like, it's in the back of my mind. Like, okay, there's some stuff here that he needs to work on, and I really wish we could have seen Devin in comparison to that. I was bummed when Devin got hurt that we weren't going to see him in the spring game, and then I came out of the spring game like tenfold more bummed that we didn't get to see him because or 16-fold, whatever Matt Berm was doing after the game on Saturday.
Let's not do that again.
But there was just enough inconsistency with Kyle in that game that I really, really wanted to see Devin. And I wonder if Ryan Day might feel the same way. He seems very eager to make it clear to everybody that he's going to let Devin back into this. And that could simply be a matter of making sure he keeps both of them on the roster. I don't dismiss that fact. That could be all it is. But part of me feels like maybe he's seen something that perhaps we have not seen in practice in the times that we've been in there that makes him think that over the next few months, Devin can really tighten this thing up and make it super interesting come the start of August when camp gets rolling. So I think it's Kyle. I agree with you guys. I don't leave spring thinking that it is a particularly wide gap.
Yeah, I don't think it's a huge gap. And I agree with you that Saturday in some ways feels like it might have been a missed opportunity for Kyle McCord to shut it down. He was not crisp the entire game. And some of that is not his fault. Again, we've talked about the offensive line and the wide receivers and all that stuff. So I don't know that we were going to be able to see the best version of Kyle McCord on Saturday, regardless of what he did. So I think that it's hard to really, really gauge it, but that's just where I don't think the gap is impossible for Devin Brown to close. And I think that's the important thing heading into the summer.
I do think that was the hardest part of evaluating everything that happened for Ohio State, which is why it was a good part or a good decision through the first 11 practices to let them play with the ones and twos for whatever that really meant, both Kyle and Devin, because there was no full strength number one lineup out there. So if both of those groups, however they may be constructed, were limited, try and get the best evaluation and the fairest evaluation you can, because even on Saturday, Kyle McCord was not working with any kind of offense that will resemble the one that would play against Indiana, most notably at wide receiver, but also even if the same 5 offensive linemen play in that game or line up in that game, they're not going to play at the same level that they were right now. Like this spring was not good for them. So it made it, there were a lot of practices, especially the second scrimmage when we left. Like, what did they accomplish? Like, I have no idea because the defense just wrecked everything. And if Kyle had somehow like grabbed hold of the job yesterday or Saturday, excuse me, that would have been way more impressive considering who was out there with him. He wasn't in position to do so. If they just let Marvin play with the ones every time Kyle was out there, then you would be like, holy cow, like this is it. It's over, because that drive looked really easy. But
if Tristan Gebbia played with Marvin, it would probably be the same thing.
Yeah, no, right. I was going to say that was, you shouldn't be influenced by that. If they had let him play with Marvin, that wouldn't have changed the fact that Devin Brown could have done the same, that also. Like, the point was we weren't going to get a true fair evaluation as camp closed. So that's why I don't have any issue with Ryan Day saying or not saying anything about who his starting quarterback is going to be right now. I get it. I have no expectation that they could do it differently.
They can pass protect differently. And so I think that's something that they are going to need to address in a major way over the next 4 months of not having football somehow. But the reality,
how could that be, Berm?
I don't know. I mean, individual players get together and do drills together all the time. So that's what they should be doing. Something, the lack of development from spring to the end of spring on the offensive line is a concern to me. Not that it's an issue that they're not being coached correctly or anything like that. I know that Justin Fry's getting as much out of them as they can. But the fact is right now, the right side of the line is just simply not good enough. And that is something that, so stock would be down, I guess, from what it started for me in the spring. I thought that we would see some noticeable growth out of Shabola and Zunmahalski, and Matthew Jones, obviously not out there a lot on Saturday. So you just don't know exactly what it's going to look like when you have the full complement out there all the time. We're still missing Jacob James in the battle at center. But whatever it is, I don't think the offensive line took the opportunity that they had to grow this spring as I would have hoped for them, and more so hoped for the quarterbacks, because they're the ones that are going to be dealing with it. But I think there's a real opportunity for Luke Montgomery to work himself into the number 2 spot at right tackle this summer, as we've talked about before. And just because the reality that is a possibility, is an indicator that something did not go as planned or as hoped with Mahalski and Shabola, in my mind.
Yeah, I think my overwhelming thought with the offensive line is that like everything should be on the table to address it, including like whether or not Donovan Jackson should like maybe play tackle. And maybe that's like my own personal preference with like Tigger Shabola, because I think he can play guard and play it really well, or reasonably well for a guy who's in his second year. It was not a tremendous performance from the right tackle position on Saturday, which kind of falls in line with what we've seen. I was hopeful that we would see maybe a little more progress than we did, and that wasn't the case. I don't want to flip flop on like what I've said about there being enough runway, but until the start of the season for offensive linemen in particular to get considerably better. I do think that's possible. But whether that's like rearranging the board and figuring out the best 5 that guys at different positions than they played in the spring, or going to get somebody, I feel a little stronger now that they need to think about alternatives than maybe I thought I would coming out of this.
I was going to try and leapfrog you in line just so that I could say this one, which was that I was buying your idea that you've had for a while that Donovan Jackson should probably play tackle. I've been able to like rule that out. I think probably through even 14 practices. Like, no, they're going to be okay. They give them time to develop. That group will come together. I'm not exclusively buying it and saying that this has to happen, but I do think that it's probably time to give it more consideration than Justin Fry and Ryan Day wanted to throughout camp. And I think a line with Donovan Jackson, if that transition goes as seamlessly as we think that it might, if he's at left tackle and Josh Fryer is back at right tackle, then I think you're like, well, that seems pretty good, because there's a lot more pieces that Ohio State can work with on the interior of the offensive line than there are at tackle. I think that's just the reality of this group. There are a bunch of people who could play guard or center for Ohio State, and not a lot of dudes who you'd feel good about letting a first-time starting quarterback or full-time starting quarterback go out there behind that group and trust that the pass protection is going to be good on the right side. Like, that's discouraging, I think, what I saw throughout camp and then on Saturday as well. I don't think Ohio State can win at the level that it wants to with the way that this group is configured right now.
Yeah, I think that could be right. And I also think too that if you're going to have someone up front who is new / inexperienced / working through some stuff, I think you'd rather have them like a guard than on an island by themselves at tackle, and which could mean, like, you know, put the more experienced guys on the outside. I don't know. I'm not ready to write off the two guys at right tackle. I think if you watch a spring game, there are some snaps that you're like, oh, that was pretty good. But there were more that were like, you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and you're getting beat for it. Now, maybe it's just that the defensive ends are really good and we're not giving them enough credit. I think maybe that's part of it. But tackle is it's iffy.
To me, though, I mean, the issue was not like, can Zen Mahalski or Tegra Shabola win one-on-one matchups against good defensive ends? Yeah, I think that they can. Are they going to learn how to play that position and get better with more reps? Yeah, they will. But Ohio State and Jim Knowles were not blitzing. I can remember one blitz that we saw in the Student Appreciation Day scrimmage that came from Lathan Ransom, and it got home quite easily. But I don't really remember many other times that they were dialing up pressure to send at Ohio State's front. The things that they were doing were just like stunts and games, and Ohio State wasn't able to pick those up. Like, that's a whole nother level of football IQ that is going to be coming at them by September. And they can learn it. I'm not saying that they can't, but like, they weren't even getting the full complement of stuff thrown at them on Saturday, and they were still struggling with just like, I know there's nothing simple about football, but like pretty straightforward, you know, stunts and games, and they were getting turned around. At one point, we looked at each other and like, where is he going? Like, his back completely turned to the stunt. Like, okay, that's not very good football.
Well, the problem I have, or that I see, is that especially for Mahalski and Tegra Shabola, who constantly are kind of being the two talked about in this discussion, is because they're the ones rotating at right tackle. Neither one of those players exudes like, I'm going to get this right confidence. And that to me is sort of the issue. Like, I understand players are learning. You're wanting to, you know, you work through things, you make mistakes. I don't see either of them. Like, Paris Johnson is a prime example of this. He did not have a great spring a year ago, but there was you didn't sense any sort of like reluctance from Paris to say, hey, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make it. I know what I did wrong and I'm going to correct it. Donovan Jackson, even when he had a pretty bad period in the middle of last season, when you talk to him, it was like, I know exactly what I did. I'm going to fix it. We don't get a lot of opportunity to talk to Tegra or Zen, and so that maybe is part of what's informing my feeling on that. But I don't see or hear like the whole, hey, this is fine, we're going to get it taken care of, like, response that you'd want to see. So that to me is an issue, because confidence is everything when it comes to, you know, you're out there on an island and you have to know that you're going to win some battles, you're going to lose some battles, but you can't allow yourself to start doubting yourself. And I think that's what is occurring.
Yeah, I think like maybe overthinking maybe is how I kind of interpreted the way that those guys were playing on Saturday. And even like juxtaposed to a guy like Josh Fryer, who I felt like kind of on a snap-to-snap basis in pass protection situations, like it felt like he had a plan. It wasn't always the right one, but he had one. Like, he had thought stuff through and like figured out, like, this is how I'm going to attack this particular play. And it didn't really feel like the guys on the other side had that. They were just sort of like guessing and getting themselves out of position or leaning and just like leaving themselves very vulnerable, I think, to giving up the kind of pressure that we saw. So, and maybe that's just an experience. Like, Josh has played far more than those other two guys have. And maybe that's something that can't be developed over the course of 15 practices. But I thought it was noticeable that the two on the right side just seemed like very much out of sorts with what was being thrown at them. And Josh, even though he did not have a perfect game, seemed to have his bearings pretty well, I thought. So I don't know. I just maybe speaks to the inexperience of those two guys, I guess.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
That's well said. I feel like we've
Wise
barely
words.
scratched the surface of spring stonks. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to call this part 1. Part 2 will come on the podcast daily for Tuesday. We'll regroup, think about what else we need to get into, because some of these turn into pretty long discussions, at least for the length of a normal episode of Podcast Daily. So we'll put a pin in that for now. We're going to talk about this and a lot of other things at Roosters for the live show later on Monday. That will be up in the afternoon. And then we'll come back, we'll reconvene, and we'll have some more contract law breakdowns and stonk tips, and we'll try and, educate everybody about our made up rules that we use for this show, and really all of them. But for Bill and Berm, I'm Austin. Thanks so much for joining us and starting your week with us right here on the Podcast Daily. Enjoy your Monday.